The Deathworlders were no longer a peaceful race. The scars of centuries of war had hardened their hearts, leaving only a smoldering rage beneath their exteriors. And today, in the cold silence of their command center, something broke within them. "Enough," said Zyra, the leader of the Deathworlders, her voice a whisper that carried across the room. Her hands trembled as she looked at the map of the human colonies, pinpointing their locations one by one. "We've fought for so long. We've endured it all. The destruction of our homeworld, the betrayal by our allies, the torture of watching our people die. But now, we take control." Across the room, human diplomats and peacekeepers watched in silence, their faces pale. They knew this moment was coming. They could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, like a storm about to break. But no one had imagined how swiftly it would arrive. Zyra had spent her entire life trying to hold on to the last vestiges of her people's humanity, even after the massacre that wiped out most of her race. The Deathworlders had been forced into the ultimate survival mode: fight, kill, or die. But now, standing in this sterile room filled with flashing screens and a hum of machines, she realized something. Her people would not survive if they kept running. They were at a breaking point, a tipping point that was more than a physical exhaustion. Their spirits had been shattered, and in that devastation, a deadly resolve was born. The humans had been their allies for years, but the Deathworlders knew better than anyone: alliances were fragile. Trust, once broken, could never truly heal. The turning point. "How much longer do you think we can hold out?" asked Kale, the human diplomat, his voice tight with frustration. "Your people are tired, Zyra. We're tired. We need to work together, not fight each other." His words echoed through the room, but Zyra's gaze remained fixed on the map. She knew Kale's plea for unity wasn't coming from a place of deceit, it was sincere. But his faith in diplomacy, in compromise, felt naive to her now. How could they trust each other when history had shown nothing but betrayal? One by one, the rest of the human team spoke up, urging for patience, for understanding. They begged her to see reason. But Zyra's mind was made up. "You don't understand," Zyra said, her voice rising slightly, the weight of her decision settling in. "For centuries, we have been the ones to suffer. We have been the ones to forgive, only to be cast aside when it no longer suited those in power. You think you understand what it's like to lose everything, but you don't." A human officer, standing in the back of the room, glanced nervously at the others. "But Zyra, there's still hope. There's still a chance for peace." "Peace?" she repeated, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I've seen too many peaceful negotiations turn to ash. Too many promises broken. This," she gestured to the room full of humans, "this is a game. A game where we're always on the losing side." The tension crackled in the air. It was clear, the Deathworlders had reached their breaking point. They no longer had the strength to keep pretending. No more negotiations. No more compromises. The moment of reckoning. Zyra stood, her sharp eyes piercing through the humans. "I've given you my people's trust for the last time. We will no longer be your pawns. The war is over, but the consequences have just begun." She turned, and with a single motion, the Deathworlders activated their war machines, the hum of engines and the clanking of metal filling the air as the countdown began. They were prepared for what was coming. And this time, they were the ones who would make the decisions. The humans were frozen, unsure of how to respond. They had spent years trying to build a fragile peace, but now they realized just how easily it could shatter. Zyra had made her choice. There was no turning back. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. The hum of the machines had become deafening, a constant reminder that something irreversible was underway. Zyra's eyes never left the screen, her expression hardening with each passing second. She had made her choice, and the countdown had begun. Yet, deep within her, a small part still wavered, caught in the weight of the responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders. Behind her, the human diplomats and peacekeepers stood frozen, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fear. They had watched this moment unfold in slow motion, knowing that the fate of their people, their colonies, rested in the balance. Kale, the human diplomat who had spoken out in vain, now stood motionless, staring at Zyra with a look that spoke volumes. It was a look of defiance, of pleading, but also of resignation. The doors to the command center slammed shut, locking the humans inside. Their voices were silenced by the thrum of the Deathworlders' war machines, the massive metallic beasts coming to life like sleeping giants awakened by the power of their creators. The screens in front of Zyra flashed red, indicating the start of their assault. Yet, the stillness of the room felt paradoxical. The tension was almost unbearable, everything was about to change, but in that moment, it was as though time itself had slowed. Zyra turned toward the humans, her gaze unwavering. "You had your chance," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight far beyond her words. "Now, we will see who survives this." Kale, swallowing hard, took a step forward. "Please, Zyra," he pleaded, his voice cracking under the pressure. "This is not who you are. Your people have always fought for survival, not for vengeance. You don't have to do this." Zyra's eyes softened for a brief moment, a fleeting look that betrayed a flicker of doubt. But it was quickly extinguished, replaced by the hardened resolve that had taken root within her. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy. There was nothing left to say. The Deathworlders had made their decision, and now there was no turning back. The calm before the storm. For Zyra, the decision had been made long before the countdown began. She had seen the horrors of war, the atrocities committed by both sides, and the futility of trust in a universe governed by betrayal. Her people had given everything in the name of survival, only to find themselves cast aside, abandoned by those they had once called allies. The constant suffering, the endless battles, it had all led to this moment. The Deathworlders had been forced to evolve into something fierce, something unforgiving. And yet, in the silence of the command center, Zyra couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something else, something greater, at stake. Was it truly their survival they were fighting for? Or had they become so consumed by their pain and rage that they no longer knew what they were fighting for? The human diplomats and peacekeepers shifted uneasily in their seats, their hands trembling. They knew there was little they could do now. They had tried to reason with Zyra, to appeal to the humanity they had once shared, but her heart had already been steeled by years of hardship. Suddenly, Kale stood up, his voice stronger now. "You're making a mistake, Zyra. You're giving up on everything we've built. But most of all, you're giving up on your own people." Zyra's eyes flickered, a spark of uncertainty visible for the first time. "What do you know of my people?" she spat, her voice rising with fury. "You think I don't understand the cost of war? You think I don't know the price of survival?" Kale took a step forward, his voice unwavering. "I know that peace is hard, and I know that the wounds run deep. But the pain of war doesn't have to define you. You can choose something better for your people. You can choose a future." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of truth. Zyra stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing. She had always believed that the Deathworlders' strength lay in their ability to fight, to survive at any cost. But now, in the face of Kale's defiance, something was stirring inside her. Could peace really be possible? Could there be another way? The tension builds. The red lights on the screen flashed again, signaling the imminent launch of their weapons. Zyra clenched her fists, fighting the internal battle waging inside her. Her people needed this victory, needed the retribution they had promised. But Kale's words resonated in her heart, challenging everything she had believed. The human diplomats sat in silence, hoping against hope that Zyra would reconsider, but they all knew time was running out. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the room broke the tension. We're ready, Commander. Zyra's gaze snapped toward the screen, her resolve firming once again. She turned to Kale, her eyes cold. There's no turning back now. But as the final confirmation echoed through the room, Zyra felt a strange sense of heaviness settle in her chest. Could the Deathworlders truly endure another war? Or would this be the last battle, the final act in a never-ending cycle of destruction? Before she could respond, the loud blaring of an alarm interrupted her thoughts. The countdown was over. The room was thick with silence as Zyra's eyes remained fixed on the screen. The message, delivered in a calm, steady voice, had shaken her to her core. It wasn't just a plea for peace, it was an invitation to trust, something she hadn't done in years. The Deathworlders, the proud warriors who had survived countless wars, had fought tooth and nail for every inch of their existence. And now, someone was asking her to lay down her arms. To surrender. To trust. Is this a trap? She muttered under her breath, her hands trembling as she ran them through her hair. The overwhelming weight of responsibility threatened to crush her as she faced the truth: the war could end right here, right now. Behind her, the humans, who had once been enemies, now stood with an air of hopeful anticipation. But Zyra couldn't bring herself to believe it. Peace was too delicate, too fragile. A sudden betrayal could shatter it in an instant. Commander, Kale's voice broke through the tension. This isn't a trap. You know that we would never risk everything like this. But you have to decide, do you want this to end? Or do you want to keep fighting? Zyra turned toward him, her eyes narrowing. You're asking me to believe that the very people who ravaged our worlds would suddenly help us? After everything they've done? Kale's eyes softened. I'm asking you to believe that we can choose a different path. That we can stop this endless cycle. And that we can build something better for all of us. Zyra's pulse quickened. Her instincts screamed at her to ignore Kale's words, to dismiss this as a human trick. But deep inside, a small flicker of hope began to take root. The message on the screen flickered again, a reminder that time was running out. Zyra looked back at the officer, who was frantically working on the terminal. The systems were still malfunctioning. It was as if something, or someone, was fighting to prevent her from making a decision. Who's doing this? Zyra demanded. Who's sabotaging our systems? The officer hesitated for a moment before answering, his face pale. We don't know, Commander. The breach is too advanced. It's like we're being attacked from within. Zyra's blood ran cold. If someone was manipulating their systems, then their enemies weren't just external anymore. They were inside. The enemy revealed. As Zyra stood, processing this new threat, she couldn't ignore the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the hacking. It was something else, something deeper. The Deathworlders had always been warriors, but they had also been survivors. And surviving meant knowing when to trust, and when not to. Could it be one of our own? She asked, her voice laced with disbelief. She had always trusted her people, but the Deathworlders were a fractured society, infighting and betrayal were constant shadows lurking in the corners. The officer's expression darkened. We've had rumors for weeks, Commander. Whispers of dissent within the ranks. Some believe that the old ways, vengeance, war, domination, are the only true path for the Deathworlders. They think that peace would make us weak. Zyra clenched her fists, the anger bubbling up once more. The very thought of betrayal from her own people was almost too much to bear. But she couldn't ignore the truth in the officer's words. The Deathworlders had always been divided by their values. For some, survival meant strength and power, while for others, it meant unity and peace. Who's leading this faction? Zyra demanded. I want names. The officer hesitated, but then spoke in a low voice. It's Director Kalos. He's been rallying support behind the scenes, convincing others that peace will destroy everything we've fought for. He's been preparing his own army. The realization hit Zyra like a tidal wave. Kalos was no stranger to her. He had been one of the top strategists, a brilliant mind who had always believed that the Deathworlders' strength lay in their ruthlessness. He was a dangerous ally to have, and an even more dangerous enemy. Kalos. Zyra muttered his name like a curse. I should have known. The plan to expose the traitor. With the realization that Kalos was behind the sabotage, Zyra knew she had no time to waste. She had to act quickly, before he could execute his plan. Kale, she said, turning toward the human diplomat. We need your help. You've been a part of the human resistance. What can we do to stop Kalos? Kale stepped forward, his expression serious. We need to expose him before it's too late. If we can cut off his access to the systems, we can stop the war from happening. But we need to do it fast. Zyra nodded. Then we have no time to waste. The Deathworlder command center became a hive of activity as they scrambled to find Kalos' hidden forces. Zyra, Kale, and a few trusted officers worked quickly, their focus sharp. They had a limited window of time before Kalos could make his move, and they knew it wouldn't be long before he realized his plans were under threat. Zyra stood motionless, her breath caught in her chest. Kalos' betrayal was no longer a whisper in the wind, it was standing in front of her, cold and unyielding. His soldiers flanked him, weapons at the ready, their eyes burning with fanatical zeal. Kalos had always been a man of purpose, but now, his purpose was twisted by a blind desire for power and vengeance. He wasn't the strategist she had once respected, he was a traitor willing to burn everything for his vision of strength. You're making a mistake, Kalos, Zyra said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. This isn't strength. This is madness. Kalos smirked, his eyes narrowing. Strength is what makes us who we are. And if you can't see that, you're no better than the humans you've come to embrace. His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. I'll give you one last chance to join me, Zyra. You could rule beside me, end this war on our terms. Zyra felt the weight of his words. The temptation to take the easy road was there, to fall back on what she had always known, war, strength, dominance. But the human diplomats, their lives intertwined with hers, had shown her another way. A way that didn't require destroying everything in the name of victory. But could she stand firm against someone as powerful as Kalos? Behind her, Kale's voice interrupted the tension. This isn't just about survival anymore, Kalos. It's about something greater, something that could save all of us. You're fighting for a future built on fear and bloodshed. We're fighting for one built on trust and understanding. Kalos laughed bitterly, his hand clenched around his weapon. Trust? Understanding? You're a fool, Kale. The Deathworlders have never trusted anyone but themselves. And neither should you. Zyra's heart pounded as she realized what they were facing. Kalos had gathered more than just soldiers, he had gathered a vision. A twisted, dangerous vision. The kind that could lead them all to destruction. She wasn't just fighting to stop him, she was fighting to save everything they had worked for. The spark of rebellion. Zyra's mind raced, searching for a way to turn the tide. She couldn't afford to play this out in brute force. Kalos' faction was too well organized, too entrenched. A direct fight would end in disaster, but there had to be another way, a way to outsmart him. Listen to me, Kalos, Zyra said, trying to buy time as her thoughts spun. What you're doing is not the way forward. We all know what happens to empires built on fear. They crumble, leaving nothing behind. Kalos' eyes narrowed. You really think you can change the course of the universe with your words? He stepped forward, his soldiers following his every move. Zyra's mind flicked back to something Kale had said earlier. The human resistance, she muttered, almost to herself. They didn't fight with brute force. They fought with unity. With strategy. With knowledge. She could use that. Zyra's voice cut through the air. You're not the only one with a strategy, Kalos. You're blind if you think that your forces can outsmart us. You'll see what happens when unity meets tyranny. Kalos hesitated, clearly rattled by her calm confidence. But the moment passed, and he gave a sharp signal. Kill them. The soldiers moved in. Weapons raised. But Zyra, who had been watching Kalos' movements, saw something, a momentary glance exchanged between his top officers. She acted on instinct. Now, she shouted. The hidden members of her command team, who had quietly infiltrated Kalos' faction months ago, rushed from the shadows. In an instant, chaos erupted. Kalos' soldiers hesitated, thrown off balance by the unexpected attack from within. Zyra's team used the distraction to secure a defensive position, creating an opening for them to strike. The heart of the conflict. The battle was fierce but brief. Kalos' forces, scattered and confused, were quickly overwhelmed by the rebellion within their own ranks. Zyra's soldiers fought not just with weapons but with a purpose, to protect the fragile peace they had fought so hard to build. But Kalos wasn't done. He had one last card to play. With a furious roar, Kalos activated the self-destruct sequence on the station's central core. If I can't have this, neither can you, he shouted, his eyes wild with madness. Panic spread through the command center as the countdown began. Zyra's heart raced. If the core went, it would take the entire fleet with it, along with any hope of lasting peace. Kalos had turned the station into a weapon of mass destruction. Zyra. Kale's voice cut through the chaos. We need to stop the countdown. Zyra's mind snapped into action. They had no time for hesitation. She rushed toward the central terminal, her fingers flying over the controls. But the systems were locked down tight. Kalos was making his escape, laughing as he disappeared into the corridors, leaving destruction in his wake. You can't stop this, Zyra. It's over. You've lost. Zyra clenched her fists. She couldn't let him win, not like this. The race against time. Kale, following closely behind Zyra, reached her side as she worked to override the security systems. The countdown clock was ticking down relentlessly, each second stretching longer than the last. Come on, Zyra, Kale urged, his voice tight with urgency. You've faced worse. You've led people through hell and back. You can do this. Zyra felt the weight of his words. She was the leader now. She was the one who had to carry the burden of this decision. The seconds ticked away. 30 seconds left. I'm almost there, Zyra muttered, sweat beading on her forehead. The victory over Kalos' faction was a fleeting moment of relief in a storm that was far from over. Zyra sat at the command table, her fingers tracing the edge of a star map. The rebellion had won a battle, but not the war. Kalos, though his forces were in disarray, had not been fully defeated. He had the resources to regroup, and Zyra feared the worst. Kale entered, his face grim. We've received word from the Outer Rim colonies. Kalos is rallying new allies. We don't have much time. Zyra stood and looked out the viewport, staring into the void of space. The stars seemed distant, cold, like the threat looming over them. Kalos wasn't just a traitor to their people, he was a symbol of something darker, a reminder of what could happen when power was left unchecked. If he managed to unite the fractured factions, it would be a war they couldn't win. We can't just wait for him to strike, Zyra said, turning back to Kale. We need to take the fight to him, disrupt his alliances before they take hold. Kale nodded, but his eyes betrayed his concerns. We don't have the resources, Zyra. The rebellion has already bled too much. Our allies are scattered, and our fleets are stretched thin. If we commit to this, we risk everything. Zyra felt the weight of his words, the burden of leadership pressing down on her. She knew Kale was right. But she couldn't afford to wait any longer. Every minute they hesitated was a minute Kalos used to grow stronger. Then we take a gamble, Zyra said, determination hardening her voice. We target his supply lines. Starve his forces out. If we can weaken his support, he'll have no choice but to face us directly. Kale looked at her, his gaze steady, though there was a hint of doubt. And if he doesn't come directly? What then? Zyra took a deep breath. Then we make sure he knows we're coming. We hit him where it hurts the most. The betrayal within. The decision was made, and Zyra quickly mobilized the fleet. They would attack Kalos's supply lines, cutting off his resources and forcing his hand. It was a dangerous gamble, but there was no other choice. If they played it safe, they would lose. But as they prepared to launch their strike, a whisper of doubt flickered within Zyra's mind. Kale's warning still echoed in her ears. What if they didn't have enough strength to pull this off? What if Kalos had something else up his sleeve? Her thoughts were interrupted when the comms officer called out, urgency in his tone. Commander, we've got a problem. A fleet of unknown ships just arrived on the outer rim. They're heading straight for us. Zyra's heart skipped a beat. The unknown ships weren't part of Kalos's forces, and they didn't match any known factions in the galaxy. Could it be a trap? Kale asked, concern etched on his face. It could be, Zyra replied, her hand tightening into a fist. But we have no choice. Prepare for battle. We don't have time to figure out who they are. Zyra's heart beat heavily in her chest as the comms crackled to life. The voice of Adrin, once a trusted ally, now filled the air like a ghost haunting her every decision. You never did learn, did you, Zyra? Adrin's voice dripped with sarcasm. Always thinking you can change the universe with your ideals. You should have joined me, taken your rightful place by my side. But instead, you're here, fighting for a cause that will never win. Zyra tightened her grip on the console, her fingers pale from the pressure. This was it, the moment she had been dreading. The man she had once fought alongside had become her enemy, and now, the fate of the rebellion rested on their final confrontation. Adrin, you're a fool, Zyra's voice was steady, though anger simmered beneath her calm exterior. You've sold your soul for power. You're just another pawn in Kalos's game. But I won't let him win. Not now, not ever. There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a laugh, low and dangerous. You think you can stop me? You always did think too highly of yourself. If you really believe you're the hero in this story, then you're even more naive than I thought. Zyra knew that words would no longer sway him. This wasn't about ideals or logic, it was a battle for survival, for everything they had worked toward. And Adrin wasn't just a traitor, he was a symbol of how far the galaxy had fallen. The battle intensifies. The battle raged on, two fleets locked in a deadly dance across the stars. Zyra's fleet was outmatched in numbers and technology, but they had something the enemy didn't, unity. The men and women of the rebellion were fighting not just for victory but for their very survival. Zyra could feel the weight of their hopes on her shoulders as they charged headfirst into the chaos. Her ship, the Sundancer, roared through the vast expanse of space, firing on the enemy's lead ship. The clash of energy beams and missiles lit up the darkness, a flash of brilliance against the endless void. Zyra's fleet fought with everything they had, but Adrin's forces seemed unstoppable. Zyra, we're being overwhelmed, Kale's voice came through the comms, sharp with concern. We need a strategy, and fast. I know, Zyra replied, her eyes scanning the battlefield. She knew they couldn't keep up this pace for long. Every move they made was being countered by Adrin's fleet, and the losses were mounting. We need to find the weakness, Zyra said, thinking aloud. Adrin's ego is his weakness. He's overconfident. He'll make a mistake. We just have to be ready to exploit it. Her eyes locked on a large ship in the center of Adrin's fleet. It was the flagship. He was aboard it, overseeing everything. She had to reach it. Prepare a diversion, she ordered. We're going in after Adrin. Kale's voice came back immediately, full of doubt. Zyra, this is a suicide mission. We don't have enough firepower to get through to him. We don't have a choice, Zyra said, her voice firm. We take down the flagship, and we take down Adrin. If we can stop him, we can stop Kalos. If we don't, we lose everything. Kale hesitated, but only for a moment. Understood. I'll get the team ready. The desperate dash. Zyra's plan was risky, but it was their only hope. She ordered the fleet to split, sending smaller groups to cause confusion and distract Adrin's forces. Meanwhile, the Sundancer would make a daring dash straight into the heart of the enemy. The enemy's fire grew fiercer, their ships closing in on the Sundancer from all sides. Zyra's hands gripped the controls as she maneuvered the ship with expert precision, dodging blasts that would have obliterated a lesser vessel. She couldn't afford a single mistake. She was too close to turning the tide. Enemy ships closing in fast, the sensors officer shouted. Brace for impact. Zyra's heart raced, but her expression remained calm. Hold steady. We're almost there. The Sundancer shot forward, a streak of light among the chaos. The flagship loomed large ahead, surrounded by a wall of enemy ships. Zyra's breath quickened as the gap closed, the tension unbearable. Then, the unexpected happened. A lone enemy ship broke from the formation and cut across their path. The Sundancer rocked violently as the ship collided with their shields. Damn it! Zyra cursed, forcing the ship to regain control. She had no time to waste. Kale's voice cut through the chaos. Zyra, we've got your back. Get through, we'll cover you. With the fleet in tow, Zyra pushed forward, the flagship within reach. Her pulse thundered in her ears as the massive ship grew closer. The final showdown. Zyra's hands flew over the controls, guiding the Sundancer through a series of evasive maneuvers. It was now or never. As the flagship loomed in front of her, she activated the attack mode, focusing all firepower on its weak points. In response, the flagship's weapons fired back with deadly accuracy, but Zyra was quicker. With a swift twist, the Sundancer dodged the shots, closing in on the target. It was a gamble, but one she had no choice but to take. The energy cannons on the Sundancer fired, striking the flagship with pinpoint accuracy. Explosions erupted across the enemy vessel's hull as Zyra's fleet followed suit, launching their own coordinated assault. The flagship's shields flickered, then collapsed, and Zyra didn't hesitate. She fired again, this time hitting the central core. The flagship shuddered, groaning under the pressure. Then, with a blinding flash, it detonated. The force of the explosion rocked the battlefield, sending shockwaves through space. Zyra's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't stop. The flagship was down, but the fight wasn't over.